Good morning and very welcome to you all on this Thursday. Thank you for joining us. This morning we have a virtual conference live from Euractiv with the support of Huawei on the subject of rural broadband challenges and opportunities. Now this morning it's a packed schedule because we have two separate panels with many distinguished speakers, so we hope to get all your questions. A little bit of housekeeping first. If you want to follow us on social media, please use the hashtag #EADebates and share your thoughts and questions if you wish. If you're following us here on Zoom, you can use the Q&A function, which you should find at the bottom of your screen, to type in all your questions. Please use that. We'll keep the chat for a separate discussion, but all your questions to our panelists, please type them in there in Q&A, and we will be leaving that open for you throughout the two panels. So hopefully we will have a lively and interesting discussion this morning. I would now like to say thank you to our first speaker. We are very fortunate today to have the EU Commissioner for Agriculture with us again, Janusz Wojciechowski. Commissioner, I'm going to hand over to you now to give us your opening thoughts on this topic.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for invitation. Digitalization is key for agricultural modernization. I think we all agree that connectivity is a crucial condition for digitization. Indeed, modern digital applications like precision farming require the speed, quality and responsiveness that can only be delivered by very high capacity broadband networks. The availability of fast and reliable internet connection in rural areas is therefore crucial to enable the development of all future smart solutions for our agriculture and rural business. Fast internet will also help bring better information, education and health services, all essential for enabling generational renewal in farming and the development of a modern rural economy. Of course, good connectivity is also a must for the development of smart villages. Unfortunately, a digital gap continues to exist between rural and urban areas. While on average 86% of urban population has access to fast broadband, more than 40% of homes in rural areas still do not have it. This is an important handicap for the development and of new businesses, jobs and prosperity in rural areas. We should also not forget the importance of digital skills. More than 40% of the EU population, mainly in rural and remote areas, still have insufficient digital skills. These gaps are particularly important in the current context of demographic change, where we see rural areas strongly affected by depopulation, brain drain and aging. Indeed, COVID-19 crisis has highlighted beyond any doubt some of these challenges. I am happy to inform you that the current programming period, the European Agricultural Fund for Rural Development and the European Regional Development Fund are contributing about 6 billion euros for the rollout of broadband infrastructure. In total, more than 15 billion of EU financing are available during the current programming period for broadband investments. To give you an example, the contribution from European Rural Development Fund represents around 18 million rural beneficiary citizens. The good news is this support will continue. The next programming period financing for broadband will be again available via several EU instruments, including possibilities to use the recently announced Next Generation EU Fund. Of course, the negotiations for the future of the Common Agricultural Policy are still ongoing, but I can say that as regards the European Agricultural Fund for Rural Development, this contribution to broadband infrastructure will continue beyond 2021. Member states can use part of the 60.5 billion added to Rural Development Fund under the Next Generation EU to program the rollout of broadband infrastructure. Member States may also consider to use part of the 560 billion of the new Recovery and Resilience Facility for investments linked to digital transition. The Digital Europe program will also support digitalization in the agricultural sector, namely through the support to the implementation of the common data space in agriculture. Obviously, this is a much broader debate. Besides funding, the Commission works on several fields in order to help Member States with faster rollout of broadband. In 2017, we launched a network of Broadband Competence Offices to advise local and regional authorities on ways to develop broadband, especially in rural and remote areas. There are today 116 of these Broadband Competence Offices in all Member States. At the same time, the Commission is also implementing an action plan for rural broadband with concrete actions at the Commission level, which aim to help Member States advance broadband rollout in rural and remote areas. Small villages have also been an important initiative in which the European Commission has been working since 2017. And this is together with members of the European Parliament, such my colleague in the panel, Mr. Bogovic, member of the European Parliament. I'd like to draw your attention to the ongoing preparatory action on smart villages. This action supports 17 villages in developing and implementing smart village strategies. I take this opportunity to announce that the second preparatory action will follow. It is planned for later this year, and it will further explore how smart villages can be supported all around Europe. Both preparatory action will collect a great number of good examples within the fields of energy, digital agriculture, bioeconomy, social innovation, health, transportation, and community services. I'm sure these actions will provide a template for rural areas to improve their resilience, building on new technologies. Ladies and gentlemen, digitalization is of course an element of cross-cutting objective of modernizing the agricultural sector. Linking digitalization and sustainability will be one of the key elements of the Common Agricultural Policy post-2020. As part of the Common Agricultural Policy strategic plans, I hope to have a clear indication from Member States how they are considering the different options for supporting smart villages, how they plan to roll out broadband and in rural areas and encourage digitalization in agriculture. As a part of a long-term vision on rural areas, which I will steer in the Commission and which will be released in 2021, I expect to look at the role of digitalization in the economic development of rural areas. I believe we have put in place the necessary instruments, including financial, to support an ambitious digital agenda in agriculture. The challenge is now for us to exploit this enabling framework to support competitiveness of agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Now, let me turn indeed to your panelist that you mentioned, Franz Bogovic, MEP, who is chair indeed of the Rumra and Smart Villages Intergroups in the European Parliament, as well as a member of the Regi Committee. Could you give us your thoughts and reactions, please?
Yeah, thanks. Good morning to everybody. Thanks for organizing this webinar and Huawei to support this. Yes, I met this problem 12 years ago when I was mayor in Slovenia in municipality Krško with 30,000 people. 2/3 of them live in rural areas, hilly area, and we had a really very bad broadband connection. Then, through support from European Regional Development Fund, we got 6.4 million euros, and we built optical fiber infrastructure in whole of my municipality. I saw at that time that it is very costly. It was around 16-17 million for less than 3,000 households. So that's easy to understand why we have still today problem that in rural areas we have a worse connection, as Mr. Commissioner said. In previous mandate, I was Regi and Agri member, and when I listened a lot about smart cities and other things, I started this debate also with my colleague Tibor Shani in Parliament about smart villages concept. Together with Commission, EU Action for Smart Villages, we come together, and also with the European Network for Rural Development. I think that we did a lot in previous mandate that this topic is now on the table, and we are much closer how to work. We finished pilot project, we speak about 2 preparatory actions, and I think that all around Europe we really spoke a lot about this. I think that COVID crisis showed us how important is that if we want to have, as our goal is, resilient, digital and green Europe, it's necessary to build broadband infrastructure in rural areas. Before we saw the population of rural areas, but if such a crisis as COVID, it shows that it's impossible to work in rural areas without this connection. As I said, I have optical fibers. I have no problem to work at home. Also other services which can use. So I think we saw, and that also it was easier to survive this crisis in rural areas than in big cities. I think that resilient Europe is also if people will be European rural areas will be populated. And as we all know, the condition for populated rural areas are jobs and quality of services. And all this is connected with broadband. So I'm sure that, as Commissioner said, in next financial perspective, also through Next Generation EU, through Rural Development Fund, and also through Regional Development Fund, my proposal in Parliament was amendment, and in a report for Regional Development Fund from the Parliament, we added 5% of Regional Development Fund for rural areas, especially for smart villages topics. So I hope that it will be successful, and that we will have cross-Europe action, that in each country we will think about this, and that all these offices which we opened will have a lot of work. So thanks for organizing this, and I will join later.
Thank you very much. And you've led us on very nicely to our next speaker, who is from the European Investment Bank. We've talked about cost already very early in the debate. So Harold Gruber, Projects Head of Division of Digital Infrastructure at the EIB. Give me your reaction to what you've heard so far.
Yeah, thank you very much. There were very stimulating arguments brought forward. I mean, clearly, rural is a challenge. I mean, that's exactly where the European Investment Bank comes in. We have basically tried to mitigate market failures. Clearly, rural broadband, especially of the very high speed capacity, very high capacity nature, it is a problem for markets to deploy them in rural areas. Either they come in very late in the time or not at all. So this is a problem because we need quickly also very high capacity in rural areas. We have made a calculation of what it takes to build out very high capacity infrastructure across Europe. So basically that all citizens have access to at least 100 megabits per second, which we believe is now the standard. That should be the benchmark for broadband access. And we calculated that for rural areas, it is about, by 2025, to spend something around 200 billion euros. It seems to be a fairly large amount. Clearly, it is not all achievable with subsidies. So you have to use public money smartly. So basically, you have to try to leverage wherever possible private financing in this field. So and we have quite a long experience with financial instruments of how you can leverage with public money, private funding, either through guarantee or other mechanisms which basically induce private investor to invest in infrastructure that on its market forces alone would not be profitable. But you can make it with appropriate instruments, make it marketable in the market. This is clearly on top of the agenda, also in our view of basically the bank likes to be now also to support fully the Green Deal of the European Commission, because we believe that broadband has a significant part in playing in making the economies more sustainable. I mean, we have seen it with the COVID crisis, what it takes to change the economic way of activities. Clearly, areas which did have or do have access to very high capacity, they have been much less affected by the crisis than areas which are not. So basically, it is of utmost importance, and it has shown clearly that you have to make peripheral regions part of the deal, because otherwise you create an increasing digital divide and an increasing economic divide. So to smoothen that, you definitely need to build out infrastructure in rural areas. The bank is financing very high capacity broadband infrastructure in the order of 2.53 billion per year. And a significant amount of that is also for rural areas. We have set up a specific fund, especially for promoting small projects in rural areas, the Connecting Europe Facility Broadband Fund. And it is having several interesting projects already in place, which are exactly to cater for these rural areas. And we are looking forward also in the next financial framework to develop specific industry related both to fiber networks, but also to 5G networks, especially to cater for the needs of connection for rural areas. So I would stop here for the time being. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Abraham Liu, Chief Representative to the EU institutions from Huawei. You're involved in this debate. Why is rural so interesting to you?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to congratulate to Your Excellency Commissioner and also MEP Bogovic to have such an important smart village initiative and to be supported by EIB as well. Personally, I'm from a rural village of southwest of China, and I worked in Africa for 9 years. So I do understand how the telecommunication services, especially the broadband services, can bring this kind of change, can bring to the villagers who live in the remote area. And we do know that in the world, there are more than 4 billion population is still unconnected. And, a majority percentage of them are living in the rural area. And it's true that, I cannot agree more with what Mr. MEP Bogovic has mentioned. The pandemic has sped up, has pushed the needs of the internet. The digital gap will have a much bigger impact in the future than ever before. Because we believe that the whole human being society is at the entering gate or stage of the information society. The connectivity is going to be as important as the water and electricity. Is about it will become a basic fundamental right. But what is the most important thing? I think no matter what application to be developed, the connectivity or it's basically the precondition. Without connectivity, you can do nothing. Whatever smart could not be implemented. So what are the basic challenge, based on our collaboration in Europe with our operators, and also in Africa with some of the operators from Europe, like Vodafone or Orange. We have done a lot of interesting experiments and innovation together in Africa. Basically, I have an example. For example, in Ghana, we noticed that 90% of the people who without MBB coverage is in the rural area, and 55% of the sites there is no electricity, electrical grid, and 70% of those areas where normally the operator will build the base station, it's not possible to have the big construction machine to get there. So at your opening, PowerPoint, you're active, you get a big tower there. So it's not only about the cost. It's sometimes most of the situation is just technically very difficult to build a facility over there. So these are the obvious pain points. And while we on the ground, we have done some concrete, innovation together with the operator, we call it Rural Star, to facilitate this to address this kind of problem. So instead of a huge tower, we symbolize all this base station into a simple, we call it Rural Star solution. The Rural Star solution, basically, we make it very simple and all-in-one outdoor equipment and easy to install. It can work in a very wide range of temperature from minus 40 degrees to 60 degrees over. So in a harsh environment, it can survive, and it can support it. The power consumption can be only around 100 watts, so that it can be supported by a 2-panel solar panel, and then it becomes much easier for the operator and more economic to have this kind of broadband to be extended to the areas. So if you are interested to have more information about this, you can definitely get to Google or search more information or video from the YouTube. And these are customized solutions to address the rural broadband coverage. And in terms of the cost, is like 40 to 80% lower than the traditional tower and micro base station. And in terms of the implementation, you don't necessarily have the electricity or power grid access. Because it's relying on the solar power. So I believe what we are talking about, the smart village, is extremely important future-oriented topic, and the connectivity is very extremely the fundamental infrastructure. And the industry side, we need to do our part. And while we have my R&D guys, together with our customer, we have bring some solution on the table. And on the ground, I think if we can work together with the operator, the policymaker, and also the other industry peers, we can make it happen. We can make the digital gap to be fulfilled. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we are going to come on indeed and talk a little bit more about innovative infrastructure and infrastructure options shortly. But many of you raised in your opening comments something that one of our attendees has also raised. Rosita Zilli has pointed out that the COVID crisis may actually push us to understand the digital divide, and maybe be a chance for rural areas to be repopulated and break the vicious circle. So, I mean, I want to ask is, to the Commissioner first, is how do we do this? Because I remember years ago, Neelie Kroes, your former digital commissioner, saying we were going to get every European was going to be digital by this year. What's going to be different in the future? How are we going to be actually able to deliver on the great aims, but it's actually got to be about delivering them? That is a question to the Commissioner.
Commissioner, I think
okay, thank you. Can you hear me also? Okay.
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much, and very interesting presentation of my colleague panelists. Thank you very much. And I think that as I said before, we are in a better situation now. Of course, if the MFF, the budget, EU budget, and this recovery plan, Next Generation EU, will be approved by the member states, I hope, we will have a lot of financial instruments for the improvement of the situation. And the situation is different across the member states. That I remember the Court of Auditors report. It was my previous job that I was an auditor before my appointment to the Commission, and 2018 was published the report about the broadband, generally the evaluation of the digitalization in European Union, and on the rural area especially there is very different situation across the member states, and member states will propose their national strategic plans for agriculture, also their recovery plan for the using this next generation funds, that a lot of possibilities. You know, the digitalization is one of the priorities of the European policy for the future, the Green Deal and digitalization, and this is the chance that we will achieve the success in this subject. And for me, this is a very important and very interesting proposal of Mr. Bogovic, that to establish the level of expenditure from the structural funds to support the digitalization in rural areas. As a commissioner for agriculture, this is my idea that we should have as much as possible funds from outside the funds of common agricultural policy, because the funds for the common agricultural policy should be spent first of all for the expenditure strictly connected with agriculture. Rural areas is not only agriculture, people live in the rural areas who are not farmers, have no connections with farming. But the strong budget for strong MFF and the Next Generation EU, this is the big chance to achieve the real progress in this question. Thank you.
Well, let me go straight to a quick follow-up question, Commissioner, as it's come in from Sarantas Michaelopoulos from Euractiv, asking about the EU Recovery Fund as part of the Green Deal. Could that help with farming practices? Where is the intersection there?
For example, the farming practices like precision farming. This is the very important idea, to reduce use of fertilizers, use of pesticides, to use this, but to have the clear information in which place, how much. This is impossible without digitalization. Of course, this is absolutely this is conditioned to develop the precision farming, which is one of the methods to reduce this, to achieve the very ambitious targets of reduction of use of pesticides, fertilizers, antimicrobials in the livestock, in the animal farming, and yes, that the Green Deal to improve the condition of animal welfare, etc. Everything we need the digitalization is absolutely conditioned for the modernization of our agriculture.
Okay, I want to come on now to a question from Stefano Agnelli, who asks, how can the European institutions ensure that valid alternative technologies such as satellite broadband complement the fiber coverage to quickly and cost effectively bridge the digital divide in rural areas? Mr. Bogovic, I think I'm going to turn that question to you first, and then we're going to come on to the others.
Sorry. Thanks for the question. Okay.
Hans, we can still hear you, but not see you, unfortunately.
Sorry, it's okay now?
Yes, it's okay now.
Sorry, problem. Yes, this is very interesting question. As we said, through COVID crisis, we saw that we need at least basic connection, 30 megabytes perhaps, for all inhabitants. Because e-learning, e-commerce, teleworking, sometimes it's enough. And if we will not have as quick as possible the coverage for all people in rural area, it will be not easy. We heard the figures about you, Mr. Gruber, I think that you said 150 billion, and I'm sure that it's not easy to collect this money and build in few years. So I think that we, in this technical solution, we heard Abraham Liu from Huawei with good solutions. There are also satellite solutions, and I think that we should think to have the common goal to build this gigabyte society as soon as possible, but immediately we must cover all people. I heard that these vouchers for satellites in few hundreds €, they also covered some people who need this. So I think that we should think about combination, and the first goal is that as soon as possible we give the connectivity to those people who want. But for sure, technical option can be different. So I think that these are also good solution. And also I saw between the question about cooperatives. I think, as I said, through this crisis, we saw it's necessary to survive, not only to earn big money. And cooperatives also works in rural areas, and sometimes I think it's also opportunity to involve them in these things which are necessary to people, because as we heard, the people who live in the rural areas are today different than it was 20 years ago. At that time, most of them were farmers, but today we must live together. We heard these goals in farm to fork strategy, which is are also connected with care for nature, other things, and also to live together with other people. And we also need good connectivity for energy sector, for modernize energy sector, to modernize healthcare sector, to modernize the care for older people, tourism, other things. So I think that it will be necessary to make a combination of different tools in which we will have two goals. First, cover as soon as possible all inhabitants in rural areas, and then come to this high-speed broadband connection to all of us who lives in the rural area.
Well, I want to stay on this idea of, if you like, different forms of infrastructure and whether funding for it should be technology neutral or agnostic in terms of the infrastructure. Mr. Gruber, what's your thinking on that?
Yes, it's a very interesting debate. I think, clearly what ultimately matters is, of course, you have a toolbox of different technologies, and the technologies significantly differ in their performance, clearly also in their cost of deployment. So ideally, you have to make a match between the different needs. On one hand, the cost, on the other hand, what is the long-term perspective? Now, clearly, at the moment, what is of utmost importance is that you get quick as much as possible broadband infrastructure. That's clear. So you would like to make leverage as much as possible on existing technology and the ease of deployment. That's one priority. But on the other hand, if you take significant amounts of public money, taxpayers' money into the hands, you want to make sure that what you invest for has also a certain proofness for the future. So it's significantly technology proof for the future. Clearly, for extreme rural areas, and there is a significant amount, probably wireless deployment, wireless technologies will be clearly one of the front runners for sustainable deployment. But then when you come sort of in the mid in between, then you have to basically to trade off the different aspects. And clearly it is then up to the policymakers to basically say of how they would like to define the thing. Now, there's a debate going on in Europe. I mean, it has been delegated, for instance, to BEREC to define what technologies qualify for very high capacity network. That's very important. That basically that okay, technological neutrality is fine, but on the other hand, you have to keep up what is realistically performing, and so therefore, it becomes a complex game of technology and legacy infrastructures that are in place. But I think this is of utmost importance that clarity is done as quickly as possible. What technologies should be supported and what not. But it's to a large extent a political decision, because at the end it will be supported by public funds. So that's something that needs to be sorted out fairly quickly.
Okay, Mr. Liu, you heard there, as Mr. Gruber says, there is a debate going on. And of course, most people are not advocating for necessarily rip out and replace of the copper infrastructure, but there is a sense that maybe upgrading current infrastructure might be a step in the right direction. Where do you see technologically this sort of difficulty with reaching that last mile connectivity?
I think with the development of the technology innovation, you know, all this, a lot of international scientists, not only from Huawei, are making effort to address those challenges. As it has been rightly mentioned by Mr. Gruber, sorry, this, you know, there are of course different options, technological options. I think it can be an easy you know, practice, you know, which has been done in the other part of the world, is to make some trial. Let's say, you know, let's say you choose a few villages, define what will the smart village to be, and what will be the criteria for the connectivity, and then let the different technology to compete. I think, you know, that can be one idea, you know, to give the public a more clear picture in terms of the technological performance and also financial situation. You know, that can be, you know, something we can commit to support. You know, while we can commit to bring some of those solutions on the ground, you know, either in Belgium or in Poland, you know, or in Slovenia, we can definitely, you know, together with our operator, can make some efforts on this.
Do you think, as a follow-up question, do you think the public cares how their service is delivered, so long as they've got the speeds that they want?
I think for the end user, is kind of user experience. You know, it's a devices with the user-friendly you know, experience. But you know, for most of the audience, I mean, the ordinary people, they don't care about what's the technology behind. But the user experience does not make a lot of you know, matters to the user experience. That is why I think a certain level of comparison, comparable, you know, trials might be, you know, it's worth to consider.
Okay, Mr. Commissioner, staying on this same question of infrastructure and how we deliver the services people want, I have a question from Alexis Guillemon, who is asking whether the Commission would be interested in incentivizing the use of satellites to reach the Gigabit Society objective in rural areas.
Thank you for this question. And this is, you know, the system of to plan the European policy is the cooperation with the member states. And I have to repeat that the situation is different across the member states, and this is very important that the initiative of the member states and to propose action which is based on the situation in individual member states. That European Commission is open for all initiatives which improve the situation, increase digitalization of the rural areas. but the proposals from member states can be different. We have the different structure of agriculture across the member states, the different problems, and this is the first of all will be decision of the member state what they will propose, and but the Commission is open for many actions. All of them should be going into the same direction to increase the digitalization, improve the situation, especially on the rural areas, and because this is the EU priority.
I'd like to pick up on something you mentioned in your opening comments, as it's been mentioned by one of our attendees as well, which is about digital skills and the digital skills shortage. And we've been asked here, what requires equipping farmers and other rural populations with the digital skills? How can this be done in a short time?
Once again, sorry, could you the last question be?
Yes. How can we equip farmers and other rural populations with the necessary digital skills in a very short time to allow them to take advantage of the opportunities that are currently there?
It's probably in the very short time. It will be the question. What means very short time? No? our plans are for the next financial period. Then the common agriculture policy is planned for the 7 years, and we will prepare as I said before, the long-term vision for rural areas, which will be the longer perspective, longer than 7 years. And the recovery plan is planned for the 4 years, and we have the different perspective for our action. But I think this is the question to the end of the next financial perspective. My idea is, and the Commission idea is, to solve this problem and to have the same situation in the rural areas than in the urban areas. It should be done. I hope it was possible. Fortunately, we have a lot of funds for investments in this direction. Thank you.
Mr. Bogovic, same question to you about bridging this digital skills gap. I mean, one of the things we're looking at with the future of farming, and particularly and the future of agriculture in rural areas, is the use of AI and so on. I mean, are the future generations equipped with the necessary skills?
I can say that I organized in the last few years, in the last 3-4 years, around 30 round tables in my country, in Slovenia, and we always invited few panelists to show their cases. I can say that a lot of them I didn't know before. I get suggestion to invite them, and I saw so many good practices which are between us, and I'm sure that if we will build this broadband connection, that it will be that people will have the access, we will see both things, that also older people will increase this basic knowledge, basic skills about digitalization, what is sometimes very important, for example, to be connected in COVID crisis between people who are in the cities and rural areas. It doesn't need a lot of megabytes, neither a lot of knowledge. But on another hand, we have good examples, especially if we speak about agriculture sector, between young farmers, and we must do the similar things as it was done in previous mandate through European Network for Rural Development, their thematic group of smart villages, that as they made this library of these good practices. Because I think it's not necessary to start at the beginning for everybody. European Union is great because we can share these good practices, and I think in the both direction, come from bottom up and to find out the smart young people in smart villages or in rural areas on one hand, and on another hand, collect this together and share this knowledge through the Europe. So I'm optimistic, and as I said, many times it's enough that you have just access to this, that you can learn, that you're connected, but with improving this knowledge, improving the quality of broadbands, we can do this, I think, quite fast. And as I said, I followed a lot this situation through COVID crisis. And for example, I spoke in Slovenia with professors and pupils from the secondary school, primary school. They said that because of COVID crisis, they learned as much as they can learn in 5 years in usual reform of education system. It was a need, and in 2 months people all learn. But we saw these problems if you don't have good connectivity, sometimes also skills, but between pupils, the biggest problem was connectivity. The next, sometimes access to quality devices. And the third, I can say, skills. Between young people, they learn this very fast. So I think I'm optimistic that if we will have this basic infrastructure, it's easy to improve skills on different level as we need for working. But usually these applications are simple. Somebody must show you. I'm not no specialist in digital tools and other things, but we can use this. And I think that good connection, good cooperation in society to make these hubs like European Union prepare this Broadband Competence Office to do these offices in countries. And that's the reason why my proposal was that we have in regional development fund as a tool for rural areas, because then it will be obligation for countries to prepare measures in these topics. Because today, I think sometimes it depends a lot on regional states' policies. In some countries, it's better. In some countries, it's worse. It should be horizontal European action. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Gruber, as you heard there, I just mentioned AI. What is the price tag for getting left behind on this? And by extension, getting left behind on things like 5G?
It is, I mean, to give you a short answer, I mean, the cost of being left behind is enormous. I mean, basically you can see it now also, I mean, just related to what we have experienced now over the last half year or so since the COVID crisis emerged. So you can see exactly where the cost arises from those who are cut off from digital technologies. Clearly, rural areas, which in principle have a number of advantages, and if they are connected, they could even empower their advantages, because basically they have a number of very attractive assets like quality of life. They have also basically an environmental, more sustainable way of living. Now, digital infrastructure can basically leverage those assets. I mean, if you think about the digital footprint of our economic activity, how much is simply due to the fact that people go to cities? So basically that you have urbanization. Of how much of that trend you can basically avoid and basically smoothen. But of course, to put this kind in action is clearly you need to create a local environment in the rural areas which is receptive to digital technologies. And therefore, I mean, before it was mentioned about what are the digital skills of farmers also, I think it is of utmost importance that you create institutions or infrastructures which basically provide the necessary learning for avoiding that people in rural areas are left behind on certain type of skills. I mean, very often those initiatives are very, very useful because there is probably a considerable receptivity at local level to acquire those technologies, because once people see the benefits, I'm very convinced that people would embrace them. So I think what would be necessary is that you have sort of digital skills program dedicated for people living in rural areas which are faced with rural area thing. And I think that is also most important for instance, for schooling. So if you get basically also the kind of educational quality out into rural areas that you typically have in urban areas, and digital technologies allow that. We see that now exactly once also in cities, people could not go physically to school, and you had to do it from home. So it doesn't matter anymore where you live. You have technologies which basically make this access available everywhere. And I think if you have local receptiveness of those kind of trends, it's a huge chance for the rural areas.
Thank you. Mr. Liu, what, in your view, is the cost of getting left behind on 5G or AI?
As I said, it's obviously, with the connectivity, the topic you have mentioned about the upscaling, e-learning or medicine, remote healthcare and precise agriculture, all this will be possible on e-commerce. Because in the future, I think if you have the activity, as you mentioned, actually my point is, you don't have to worry that much how people will adopt the digital technology. There is a famous experiment made by a famous professor. His name is Nicola Pandi from MIT, the multimedia laboratory in the MIT in Ethiopia. Actually, they have chosen one unconnected, very remote rural village where the population there, they have zero education previously. And then they with the connectivity, and they set them a few tablets, teach them nothing, including how to charge it. They don't do it. So the villagers, after 1 week, they learn by themselves how to charge the tablet and how to power it on, and then surfing the internet by themselves. But nobody teach them. So after 2 weeks, they began to use YouTube, and they began to listen to ABC songs. So the people, once you have the highway or the road built, people will walk on it, and then will learn how to balance this, to try different kind of mistakes, and then they learn by themselves, and then they get accessibility to the international outside world. I think that kind of potential is tremendous. We don't have to worry that much. But if there are three things at the moment, to emphasize, it's still the connectivity, and connectivity. And I think Huawei, this is the 20th year, for Huawei in Europe. We have been a trusted partner for European operators, and we are committed to be part of the effort to support this smart village initiative.
Thank you. Commissioner, I think I'm going to come to you for your sort of last thoughts. I've asked the last two panelists what was the price tag for not getting on board with 5G or AI. And I want to ask you, why is this so crucial to European agricultural industry, and what would be the consequences of not embracing the digital opportunities?
From the position of my responsibility, because generally the digitalization is the responsibility for my colleagues, Ms. Vestager, Commissioner, Vice President Vestager, and Commissioner Breton. They are specialists for the digitalization. My position is my responsibility is, first of all, to ensure the same standards for people living on the rural areas, because are the same European citizens, and the equal chance for them is very important for development of rural areas. As Mr. Gruber said, that the population, and we should to prevent the population of the rural areas to do everything which is possible for the same living standards on the rural areas, and digitalization is one of the conditions of this. The second, this is very important for the competitiveness of our farmers, competitiveness with the outside, with the third countries, and also internal competitiveness in European Union. Farmer with digital skills has more chance to compare prices, to know everything, what is to recognize the market, etc. This is very important. Or to reduce costs, like precision agriculture. This is to reduce the production cost, etc. And the profit will be the better competition of the European farmers. And yes, this is the main values. But I like not to speak much about the technical issues, because it is not my responsibility. But first of all, the same standard urban and rural areas. This is the key question, and it should be the no limits for the people living on the rural areas. We have the problem with exclusion of the communication exclusion. For example, this is the similar like digital exclusion that is very difficult to that in the urban areas people they have the public transport, and the rural areas is difficult to go everywhere. It's necessary to use own car and to go to the cities, and in the digitalization is similar problem. And we should our obligation is to ensure the same standards for the people living in the rural areas, in the urban areas, and competitiveness of our farmers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And I think that is where we're going to wrap up our first panel. I'm very grateful to you all for joining us. Thank you, Commissioner, for taking the time once again to engage with people. And we will have one of your colleagues from DG Connect on our next panel. So we'll move a little bit more into that digital side of things. Thank you once again, Mr. Bogovic, Mr. Gruber, and Mr. Liu for making this first panel a very interesting discussion. Let me remind viewers that we are going to take a short break, but don't go away. Grab a coffee, as you would if we were at a normal conference, and do join us for our second panel in just a few minutes, where we will be looking more closely at rural broadband and digital farming. Welcome back to our second panel today on rural broadband, the challenges and opportunities that are facing us. Now, I'm not sure where he is attempting to join us from, whether it is a rural or urban area. Unfortunately, we are having some difficulties getting one of our panelists through. That is Robert Henkel, who is from DG Connect in the European Commission. But with any luck, he will be joining us shortly. However, we do have, thank you very much, our other two panelists, MEP Elsi Katainen, who is the Vice Chair of the Agri Committee in the European Parliament, and Pekka Pesonen, who is the Secretary General of Copa Cogeca. Ms. Katainen, let me start with you first. We're talking about the challenges and the opportunities. Give us, as a broad opening statement, what you think they are, and what, as I asked the last panelist at the end of their panel, what the costs are for being left behind. I think we need to... Can we have? Yes, I'm sorry. We do have Robert now on as well. Thank you, Robert, very much for joining us. We're just going to kick off the panel now with Mrs. Katainen, who is going to tell us about the challenges and opportunities for rural broadband.
Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much at first for the possibility to present our policy on broadband and connectivity. It was a little difficult to be connected, but now we reached successfully the way. First of all, I would explain the context and the motivation for our policy. The motivation context of our policy is a market failure in rural areas. This obviously, if you see our last DZ report, which reporting the situation of coverage, broadband coverage in Europe, we can we can see that 68% of European households are covered in average with connection above 30 megabit downloads, but only 59% in rural areas. Same situation is concerning the very high capacity networks above 1 gigabit connection. There we have an average 44% coverage of all European households, but only 20% in rural areas. This is the situation at the moment concerning the fixed connection, and this shows the gap between high populated area and rural areas. And we have different ways to overcome this gap in rural areas. The most important frame of all our doing is the common vision and strategy. This is the Gigabit Society strategy and 5G action plan from 2016. There you can find our main targets for 25. This means the main targets are that all main socioeconomic drivers should have access to gigabit connectivity until 25. This means schools, business parks, universities, research centers. These are the so-called socioeconomic drivers. And second target is that all urban areas, major routes and railways should be uninterrupted connected with 5G until 25. And the third target is that all European households, rural and urban, should have access to at least 100 megabit download, upgrade able to gigabit. These are the targets of our strategy, and there are different tools to implement the strategy. One is the regulation. As you know, we have last year published a new European Electronic Communication Code to push private investment in networks, also in rural areas. Then we, this year, updating our cost reduction directive. This is a legal frame to reduce the costs of building up new networks, broadband networks, for example, by using already existing infrastructure, by energy or water suppliers, or by infrastructure sharing, also frequency sharing, for example. These are possibilities to reduce the cost to build up new networks. And the second very important tool is our funding possibilities of European level. On the one side, state aid by the European Structure Investment Funds, as you know. Between 2016 and 2020, there was a possibility of 6 billion euro, mainly invested in rural areas to connect such areas with high velocity networks. This means minimum 30 megabit download. Then we have, in addition, also the created 2018 the Connecting Europe Broadband Fund. This is a fund of loans and for business case with high risk. This is normally the case in rural areas. And there was a leverage effect of 1.7 billion European-wide. And then, as you know, we have also started already 2018, 2019, the Wi-Fi for You initiative to support free connectivity in public spaces, mainly in rural areas. This is a voucher system. One voucher means you get 50,000 euro to build up the active elements and the antenna, but you have the community have to provide the backbone and backhaul connection. And this, we have just finished the fourth call very successfully, and over 8,000 municipalities in Europe got this voucher or will get it and will invest in such kind of public connectivity in rural areas. And in addition, for the next MFF, or the next framework program, multi-annual financial framework program, we have proposed the CEF Digital proposal. This is also a state aid, direct completely managed by the Commission. Our proposal is for 2 billion for mainly 5G network crossover, but also backbones in rural areas and submarine cables. There's a very complex possibilities to use this money. For rural areas, the most important aspect is the so-called 5G communities, because this is a special part of this program to connect socioeconomic drivers, again, hospitals, schools, business parks, but also the household around these drivers by building up backbones, glass fiber backbones in rural areas and other areas with a risk of lagging behind. This is our funding program, but often underestimated is the last important tool we provide. This is the tool of knowledge distribution and technical assistance, but because money is not enough, but you have to know how to invest the money, and this means you have to think about the technology you use, you have to think about a business plan, plan to build up such kind of networks. And for this we have launched in 2017 the so-called Broadband Competence Office network. This is in the moment 28 national and over 60 regional broadband competence offices who help the local authorities to build up such networks with advice concerning the planning, the business plan, the technology question, the financial question, also to advise them to get to use our funds, how to use it. And for this we have created in the same time the facility office for the BCO facility office in Brussels to train them, to bring them the same level of knowledge in whole Europe. For this we have already made last 2 years many training sessions on this typical subjects you have to learn. For mapping as a subject, using a funds as a subject, technology question, and so on. And in addition to this very dynamic competence office, broadband competence office network, we have already for many years the Broadband Europe website published. This is a website, so it's more, you can call it more a portal, with I think biggest collection of knowledge concerning broadband in Europe. There are many different sites also on the same subject as already mentioned, which you have to learn to build up such networks, either concerning the technology question, concerning business plan again. Also there's also a guide for investing in all languages, of all member states. You can find this guide on this website. And you find also country pages in all languages, all of our member states. And on the country page, you find information concerning the situation in your country, political situation, funding situation, and so on, and also contact person. And we have a very big.
I'm going to stop you there because I want to bring in.
1 minute. I just need only 1 minute to finish it. And we have also a big database on best practice, over 200 best practice on this website, which you can use to learn how your neighbors in your surrounding have already successfully implemented such broadband building projects. And finally, last sentence, we have also the GLB Days and European Broadband Awards competition to push the best practice and distribute all the knowledge you need. Thank you very much for your patience, but it was necessary to give the whole overview, not only a part.
Yeah, well, I'm sure people can go online, we're all online already, and check out that website and see what's on it themselves. I want to bring in Ms. Katainen and tell us, you're the Vice Chair of the Agri Committee. What I wanted to ask you is the cost or the potential price tag of being left behind on 5G or on these great new digital tools in general.
Yeah, dear participants, I'd like to thank Euractiv for the invitation to this panel. A little introduction. I come from a rural area in Finland, North Savonia, where I've been a dairy farmer until this spring, when we had a renewable change and our son took a responsibility of our family farm. Talking about connectivity in rural areas, I'm sure that during these extraordinary teleworking times, many people who have left their city homes and traveled to countryside and summer cottages have noticed that it is challenging to find connection. And when we more specifically think about agriculture, we have already now and possibly in the future even more technology which requires fast internet connection, just as in the case of precision farming, which could be tailored to be part of the CAP eco schemes. We need to take care of the livelihood and competitiveness of rural areas as a whole, and not only from agri perspective. We need also tourism, infra, and support for small and medium-sized enterprises as part of rural development. This makes rural areas attractive for next generation. About your question, what is the price tag for being left behind on 5G? In my understanding, 5G networks are mostly quite centralized and maybe then not the most cost-effective option. When we think, for example, northern Finland, where population density is very low. But if we have a good base with broadband, it would be possible to build workable 5G station on the farm. I can see opportunity there. But of course, 5G offers faster connection, and the future's technology will need even more higher speed internet.
Well, I'm going to straight away come in then with a follow-up question to you that has been posed by one of our attendees online. And of course, I will remind those watching that you can indeed send us in your questions using the hashtag EA Debates or indeed using the Q&A function on Zoom. But Vince Hart has asked whether the EU needs to ensure that cultural and social capital is not eroded by digital solutions. Is that a concern that you would have? I guess it goes to the quality of life questions in rural areas.
Yes, it is. It's so much more than just enterprises, or even much more than how agriculture is doing. It has so much with everyone's daily life. We know the connections are so important for the young, but for the youth, because they think it's so important to their daily life and social life also. So we have to pay attention also for these things.
Thank you. Let's turn now to our final panelist, Pekka Pesonen, who's the Secretary General from Copa Cogeca. Thank you for your patience. Let me hear your opening thoughts and indeed your reactions to what you've heard so far.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for the kind invitation from Euractiv to join you in this panel. I certainly listened carefully what the other panelists also in the first panel mentioned. I'm not going to repeat those main arguments, for instance, in terms of financing. I think Mr. Henkel made some impressive, let's say, presentation when it comes to what has been targeted from the EU level. But let me say that, well, we agree in European farming community that the digital agenda and its application is very much a key to survival of rural areas, like it is key for survival of the whole economy of European Union, and globally speaking, this is what we need to address. I would like to draw your attention to the attractiveness of rural areas, especially for the young entrepreneurs, young farmers youth, our teenagers' point of view. This morning I woke up at 5:30 here in Brussels, and my teenager was still, let's say, chatting with his friends via internet, and I had to order him to close the PC and get to sleep. And you could imagine that this would be something that they would expect also to be able to do when we go to our holidays on my farm, actually in the same part of the country in Finland that Elsie comes from. But it's very much about the rural community. Increasingly, it's not only the agriculture sector, it is very much about that rural fabric that the digital agenda could actually enable us to benefit from. From farming perspective, it's also to employ new technologies. I think Commissioner Wojciechowski pointed out precision farming, also artificial intelligence, that is quite important for us. We need some EU financing, but that's not alone. We need to have member states involvement and also rural economy relevant businesses getting on board to this investment cycle. We need to ensure that we are actually covered because basically all the technologies that are linked with the European Union relevant policies such as CAP will increasingly be digital in the coming years. We certainly support the Smart Villages initiative, and in this respect I was happy to see Mr. Bokovic take part in the discussion. But ladies and gentlemen, let me point out one particular aspect that wasn't actually touched upon that much, and that is that we need to ensure that digital agenda is actually matched by the relevant policy making and decision making when it comes to enabling that digital agenda to be fully utilized. It's like a tool. It's like a pipeline where we get the information back and forth, but it is not the actual mean to do things and make things happen. And so therefore, especially from a farming perspective, there are a lot of issues that we need to address, enabling some technologies at the EU level to enable us to collect relevant data to be presented back to the consumers, preferably so that the consumers can make the informed choice, or whoever uses rural services, like, for instance, Ms. Katainen pointed out, for agritourism. But this is quite often forgotten. It's not about following YouTube videos and cat videos in the internet. It's about filling your tax declaration, being in contact with your business partners, applying for support in the CAP, doing that in a less efficient manner, and that needs to be enabled all across. This is what especially the young would expect. And I would call for high ambition, like I think our Commission representative also pointed this out, and also Commissioner Wojciechowski. We really need to make this work in case if the EU intends to be credible in the eyes of rural people. It's not only the farmers, it's very much about how we engage these rural communities to wider economy and make the necessary investment. And let me conclude by pointing out some of the worrying comments that I heard quite recently from very top management of the European Commission. Rural life quite often is not very romantic, picturesque way of life. It's hard living. Sometimes it's tough, but you need to bring in the means for those, especially young families, young people that are looking forward to make a living out of rural economy, agriculture, forestry included, agritourism, all of that. And we need to make sure that that economic approach is also maintained as a part of this mix. This is not about being a happy farmer out in the meadows with, let's say, happy animals. This is about making a living. And I cannot accept that my kids, if they happen to go to my farm, my home farm, my family farm in Eastern Finland, that they would have to be happy with a lot less income than their colleagues and their friends in urban areas are getting. They need to have the same access to the same services, education, social care, healthcare. And these elements are hugely important, especially for the rural people in general. If they don't have access to, let's say, healthcare, social services, for instance, increasingly through internet, there's no hope that we could get these young people there. So I think we need to have a bit of a reality check, even in the top management of the European Commission, that it is good to put pretty pictures forward for rural life, but at the end of the day, It is the hard life that we have to explain to the bank manager when we make the investment for the farm and make a living for the family in the very early stages of that family itself. So please take this into account. It's exactly the same thing that we have also in urban areas, nothing more.
I hear what you're saying about the need to be able to do slightly more complex things and watch cat videos. And obviously filling in your tax return online or applying for a grant or something are slightly more complex. Now, even if the policies and so on and the tools were there, is there a digital skills shortage, or do you feel that that is not as big a problem?
I would consider the digital skills gap more of a kind of generational shift. And I'm a strong believer in kind of giving an example. And you don't have to do more than giving that example within a family. And that usually serves a purpose. At least all individuals that I know, especially the older generation, more senior people, senior citizens, they actually get on board with the younger family members. And they sometimes are at least enthusiastic to get on board and involved. And so that's the point. That's if we intend that expect that these families are there in rural areas, they will actually, by being there, they would engage their family members and make sure that the gap will be actually diminished also in generations that don't necessarily have that much of a kind of skills readily available for them. So of course we have this, but then I believe that we will fairly easily overcome that with the fact that we actually use the community once again to get these people on board. But it actually really needs to deliver. If the connection is not good and they struggle with the connection per se, you could imagine how demotivating that would be, especially to the generations that haven't been that much used to utilize these kind of services. So I'm a strong believer in technology and modeling that within the farming community, families and rural community in itself.
Mr. Henkel, so what's your reaction to the suggestion that it's not just about investment, that there needs to be supporting policies for all these potential new infrastructure or even existing digital infrastructure that's there in rural areas?
Yeah. As I already tried to explain, the main focus of our policy are the rural areas. When we are all, since 8 years, I'm working on the subject only to bring high velocity networks in rural areas. And I gave you explain different tools we are using. It's not only money. To be honest, there's in principle enough money. The 6 billion of the structure for state aids was not really used, not because there's no need to use it, because there's not the knowledge how to use it. It's not easy to build up a glass fiber network in rural areas if not the big companies are doing it, because it's not a business case for them. It's a market failure, obviously, in rural areas. And this is the reason because we're going on and have developed a new SAF digital program, as I told you, to bring 5G's special rural areas, because 5G has one advantage. You don't need to build up fiber to the home, to each home. It's enough if you have fiber in a small village or in the street of a village, and then distribute it wireless about the 5G mobile technology. And then you get also between a minimum 100 or 200 megabit download and 1 gigabit, and up to 1 gigabit. This is normally enough for all your daily use of internet, private or professional. It's enough for farming. It's enough also for the kids to download video. The problem is to distribute also the knowledge how to build up it. We have many. I told you over 200 best practices already published on our European broadband website. Everybody has access, and in every rural areas in Europe can find example not far away from them. But often it's a problem that the local authority don't know their other local authorities who have already implemented the best practice how to do it. And you can learn from your partner in your own country, because the conditions of building up. The legal condition, financial condition, technical conditions are very different in each member state, and so it's very important that you know the special situation in your country, and you can learn from successfully already implemented local broadband networks. This is also a very important part of our work. Beside of the funds, the funds are very generous, as you know. I've told you, billions of money on the ready to be used, but how to use this? This is mostly the most important question, and you need time for planning of your own glass fiber network in rural areas. You need normally 2 years, minimum 2 years, 3 years for the planning alone, and for the public procurement process and all the process you have to do to find a company who built up this, and to also operate, to make it practice. This is a complex work, and we have already big successes already. I told you when concerning the wireless connection, for example, before I described the fixed situation, this is much better. So we have a 5G mobile coverage in average in Europe by 99.4%, and also in rural areas 98%. It's a big step forward during the last 5 years. And so you have a minimum 5G mobile coverage in nearly all rural areas also. But this is not enough perhaps for special application, but it's enough for the children, for example, to communicate or to exchange also surf, and to exchange also videos or such things. We are on the way, and the new 5-digit new program, CEF Digital 2, is the very next step forward to reach our 25 target. This means every citizen in Europe should have 2025 minimum 100 megabit download upgrade level. This is a real target, and all the member states agreed with the target. It's not a target only from the Commission. All the member states last year agreed with this target, and so they're changing now the national broadband plans, they're adapting the national broadband plans, they learn to use our funds, but also their own funds, because in most member states have their own funds or in addition, but this needs time. To build up a glass fiber network is not you cannot do it in some weeks. You need some years to do this, and this is the reason because we a little bit not so happy as we could be, but we have reached many things. I'll give another example. For example, I told you that at the moment we have 68% of European households on average have above 30 megabit download. 2014, it was only 67%. And also for the gigabit connection, we have at the moment average 44%. 2011 was only 10%. There are big step forward, but we have not finished our work, without doubt, and we're going on. Yeah. With all aspects, not only money. I underline it every time again, because the people thinking fund or money is enough. No, you really to know how to use the money and to implement such networks.
Ms. Tynan, how do you feel about the argument that if this takes time, is stuff being done fast enough? I know we had some targets that indeed have been missed in getting every European digital.
She has to.
Ms. Katainen, I think we have you on mute.
Sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
You can hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. First of all, I'd like to say that I do agree with Pekka Pesonen. Rural areas are more than just summer cottages and farming. We have a lot of other small and medium-sized companies too, who will need connections for everyday business. But how can we accelerate connectivity to fast internet with the action plan for rural broadband it is good that we have action plans, but the most important thing, even with a good plan, is that we bring it to action. Ensuring proper funding and easy access to this funding for rural areas is very, very important. And we must ensure that as politicians that there is easy access for the possible funding for actors in rural areas. And I think it is very important to tell our youth all over the Europe that actually you can rule the world from little villages. Locality and globalization, they can brought together and closer to each other. They don't have to exclude each other away. Confrontation between rural areas and urban areas can be quite scary, but good telecommunications connection can bring those closer together, and this must be our goal.
Well, I want to also reflect a bit, because we haven't quite so much, certainly not in this panel, discussed the impact, or indeed the impetus, of the recent COVID-19 pandemic, and the way in which it highlighted certain disparities, but also certain desirabilities about rural areas. Can you reflect on that and see whether there is maybe some way going forward to leverage the horrible crisis that we've all lived through in a way to make things better and serve as a motivation for the future?
Yes, I see that already now, when most of the people has worked remotely, we have seen the need and the huge benefits of fast and workable internet connection, both in rural and urban areas. It is very important to get the markets and industries back to running. And I see that digital development has important role to play. But when it comes to recovery and next generation plan, it is essential all recovery measures are available already during transitional period. We need all investments and recovery sooner than later.
Okay, Mr. Pessinen, if you want to reflect as well on whether there's any lessons to be learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, I would be interested to hear it. But I also want to ask you about market forces. So possibly your reactions first to whether we can leverage the lockdown situation.
Well, we certainly saw a sudden increase to the digital services due to the fact that people didn't have the opportunity to go to the offices, in some cases to the office to work in normal circumstances. And we see this also as an indication that there is a competitive edge for the rural areas to provide this kind of let's say out of office distant connection, and you could actually stay part-time in certain let's say professions in rural areas and do the contribution from your rural house or wherever you have the ability to stay. So this is something that we saw, and everybody is familiar with this. In addition, of course, when it comes to the COVID-19, this also demonstrated how interconnected we are in the EU, and any disruption to these connections. And of course, the first was of course physical connection, especially because of the certain national decisions to close borders, but also when we had the robustness or the resilience of the food chain. This was really important for us, that we had free flowing information, free flow of goods, and especially within the single market in the EU. And I think we can learn lessons from this also from the digital point of view, to understand that in fact in the digital agenda we didn't have these barriers at all, and that enabled us actually to recover from the immediate market reactions much sooner. If we didn't have these connections through digital services, we certainly would have ended up in a much worse situation, especially also when it comes to food security. Now we have the opportunity to communicate all across the EU and make sure that our business partners and other partners in the value chain actually knew what we were doing and how to do that in a slightly different manner.
That was exactly the next question I was going to come on to you to ask about, since we are referring to digital farming, and this question of security of supply on the food chain has been highlighted by the pandemic. What about sustainability?
Well, we see this very much the low-hanging fruit. And this is also, perhaps I should have been more concrete when I said that we need to have these, let's say, accompanying measures, authorizations, policy decisions at the EU to go together with the digital agenda. Because we are quite confident that we here in Europe, in the EU, we are the champions of the modern technologies in general, also in particular in the value chain, food value chain. And we feel that if the consumers appreciate, if they truly give added value to certain sustainability initiatives, and we can actually reliably demonstrate what we are doing. That's why we are very much interested in, for instance, blockchain. We see some opportunities there, but that's the essence of this all. We need to increase the flow of information in a reliable manner, and digital agenda would actually provide the tools for this, for the consumers to show their appreciation in their informed choices in the marketplace towards more sustainable produce. We see this as a fundamental part of the recovery plan from COVID-19 too. It's part of the Green Deal, but then it doesn't happen on its own. We need to generate data, and this is something that I'm very happy that together with other stakeholders, our organization has been very active over the past couple of years. We came up with an idea, and I think this was in spring 2018, with initiative with at that stage, I think 8 other stakeholder groups at EU level to come up with the EU level guide of principles for data sharing, guide of good practice in data sharing. And this actually was fundamental part of the equation, that we acknowledge the importance of the value chain itself. We acknowledge the need for technologies to share information, relevant information all along the food chain, benefit from it as much as it comes from your own action, and make sure that the flow of information actually is there in both directions. And that actually would enable the consumers to rely on the data that they receive, and importantly, the economic operators, not only in rural areas, but also in urban areas, would be assured of the consumer response. And this is truly something that we count on, especially when it comes to increased, enhanced sustainability of European agriculture.
Thank you. Ms. Katainen, I want to stay with this question of sustainability. How important is that to you? And I'm going to also bring in a question from one of our audience who is asking about the possibilities of community engagement and facilitation. So I'm wondering, how important is that, both in terms of the rollout of broadband, but also in terms of sustainability?
Yes, of course. Also, sustainability can be approved and improved by good connections. We have to travel less. We can use shopping online, and also other everyday things that we are doing more and more these days. Artificial intelligence is very essential, and it's very already applied widely, and it will surely be one of the biggest things that EU will have on this agenda for the coming years, and it should be that way. It is very important. There's a lot of potential in AI and automation for rural areas, for example, in agricultural techniques, but also in transport. From a regulation point of view, artificial intelligence is a challenge. We need clear ethical framework, clear and understandable rules on liability, and also addressing issues like cyber security and data protection. And if we want to push artificial intelligence, it is important that we regulate in a technology neutral way to encourage investments, but also keeping in mind the human and society's needs. And they can be different from rural areas than in urban cities. It is important to make sure that artificial intelligence products are safe, so people can trust them and benefit from using them.
Okay, finally then, Mr. Henkel, the same rather broad last question to you is whether you think there's anything that we can learn from the COVID-19 crisis that could be used to leverage better take-up of policies in the future.
I think we have already learned much by the crisis. And for example, without doubts, the shutdown shows how important connectivity in general is. And we survived with very good connectivity by home office, by e-learning, by e-health, by reducing the transport. And I think the home office will become, before it was a special case, now it will become a normal case for many enterprises, especially in the public service or in the service area generally. And but we have also the positive effect on the nature to reduce the transport, for example. And it means we have seen how effective our networks are already, because in spite of some doubts and fears that the networks will break down during the COVID crisis, was not the case. They were stable, and the resilience was already strong enough. This was also the result of the BEREC. BEREC is the institution of all telecom regulation authorities here in Brussels. They made a monthly report on the situation on the networks in the member states, and it was and more or less there were no big problems. In spite it was a big increase of using the networks. And as you know, our Commissioner Breton also asked the big platforms to reduce the downloading of high velocity films and pictures, and this was done, and this was successfully done, and the networks were more or less stable. I mean, perhaps not in any case, but this was a good experience. And we have learned from the positive effect to be more online and to use the networks also for professional life. This is a big learning effect we have already, and we're going on this effect, and we try to optimize this. And I have explained to you what is our instruments, technical and financial, and I think I'm really convinced that in 5 years, also in rural areas, the connectivity will be much better. And 5G and the new digital program is a big chance and a big opportunity to go on this way, and also for the business parks and the digital farming in rural areas. It will become a big chance to use this high performance and high velocity networks of 5G. And as I told you, the smart 5G community is one main part of our new digital program. And this means we are really focused on these areas, and and I think we go on this way, and I'm sure we be in 5 years. This coverage will be much better than now. in spite of the fact it is not so bad concerning 5G mobile coverage, I told you, but we have to do it also on the gigabit level. This is very important, especially if you go in the high developed technique of smart farming. You have a big data increase, and to manage this increase, you need also high velocity, very high velocity networks, like minimum 100 megabit download, and best would be gigabit connection.
Okay, thank you very much. And indeed, thank you to our panelists from both panels. I think it's pretty clear we're all singing from the same hymn sheet and wanting to see high-speed digital broadband rollout across all the areas of Europe, rural and urban. And we are at a unique turning point. So please do keep this conversation going online and stay tuned for more Euractiv virtual conferences using the hashtag EA Debates. We will all be virtual for quite a while in this brave new world. Thank you again and have a great day.